We do know that among the returning Pokemon that will be added in Scarlet and Violet DLC, one of those confirmed Pokemon is Whimsicott, which in VGC meta, Whimsicott is very commonly used as a tailwind setter because of its prankster ability. It can do that very easily. So in today's video, instead of doing a normal competitive analysis that I typically do for returning Pokemon, I'm going to do more of a comparison. Because the Pokemon that Whimsicott directly competes against is Murkrow. So that's what we will be comparing, Whimsicott versus Murkrow. As always, starting with typings, Whimsicott has Grass Fairy type, which is not a particularly offensive typing. You do have 6 super effectives, but there are 3 typings that both Fairy and Grass do not hit very well. So there's actually a decent amount of Pokemon that resist both of the stabs. If we compare that to Murkrow, there's only 5 typings that Flying Dark is super effective on, but the resist spread is considerably different. Very few Pokemon resist both Dark and Flying. So if we're just looking at offense, Murkrow already has quite an advantage here. But these are both typically run as a support, so how's the defensive stats? So Whimsicott has a 4x from Poison, which is not a particularly common typing to see. There is Glamora, which has been showing up more recently, but I rarely ever see Sludge Bomb on it. Its Poison type offense is typically not spec'd into. There are also 4 standard 2x super effectives, but 6 resist plus an immunity is actually a pretty good defensive spread. So I would actually say this typing is pretty good defensively, because it does actually resist more typings than it is weak to. It's just some of those weaknesses are pretty common right now in Scarlet and Violet's meta. Compare that to Murkrow. We have 2 immunities with Ground and Psychic, which is pretty good, and 3 typings that are resisted, and it is weak to 4. So still a pretty solid defensive typing. It's not weak to a whole bunch of stuff, and dual immunity is always nice to have. So I think defensively, it's really team dependent which typing is actually better. Though I do think Dark Flying is a lot easier to just throw into any team. There's a lot more resist to work with on Grass Fairy, which can make it easier to switch Whimsicott in onto a resisted hit because you're more likely to run across a resisted hit, especially if you're good at predicting what your opponent's gonna send into that slot. So I'm not really gonna say one typing's better than the other here. They both have good strengths, because Whimsicott has the Grass typing, which gives immunity to powder moves, but Murkrow has the Dark typing, which is immune to prankster moves. So it all just kind of balances out, and both are really quite solid. Though offensively, Dark Flying is just better. I'm not going over abilities because these are 99.9% of the time going to run prankster, and they both get it. Now if we look at stats, Whimsicott's actually pretty fast at 116 base speed stat. The defensive stats are not atrocious. You have a little bit of physical defense, and the special defense stat's not really that bad either, though the HP stat's kind of low. And offensive stats are, well, it has some special attack, but I wouldn't expect this to be a heavy hitter, let's just put it that way. Now Murkrow shares the same hit point stat as Whimsicott, but the bulk is considerably less because the special defense and defense are almost half that of Whimsicott's, which if you run Eviolite on Murkrow, you can kind of make up for this, and then the bulk becomes very similar, even slightly better on Murkrow's side, but you are giving up a focus sash for that. And the speed stat is much lower, which can actually matter a lot on these kind of Pokemon, because both of these Pokemon have the potential to one-hit each other, because the attack stats on Murkrow are actually pretty decent, and you could get a really nice Brave Bird into an opposing Whimsicott, but a Whimsicott can also get a Moonblast into that very poor special defense stat. So if you don't have your bulk properly set up on an Eviolite build, your Murkrow could get one hit by a Moonblast, which if you're running a bulky build, you're obviously going to be considerably slower than Whimsicott. But even a max speed Murkrow, you're still slower than a Whimsicott, especially since most Whimsicott run max speed investment. So again, we see that Murkrow is technically more offensive, both in typing and in just raw stats, but Whimsicott is faster and actually has better natural bulk. which makes Whimsicott better suited for switching in on a resisted hit versus Murkrow. But as I said, the Eviolite build can kind of make up for that. It's just you're sacrificing either offense or speed to run an Eviolite build that's actually bulky, which is the reason why we've been seeing less Eviolite builds as time goes on. I know I've seen a lot more Focus Sash these days. Now, if Whimsicott's moveset does not get nerfed into the ground, then it will have access to Moonblast and Tailwind, which 90% of Whimsicotts run both Moonblast and Tailwind. And the other two moves are just dependent on how you want your Whimsicott set up. Some common moves that it typically runs are things like Helping Hand, Fake Tears, Encore, Taunt, and sometimes Switcheroo, which I know was quite annoying to see in Gen 8 specifically. And some less common options like Trick Room, Charm, Screens, and even Leech Seed and Cotton Guard, both of which I think are very interesting moves. Though I really haven't seen a Cotton Guard Whimsicott, it is definitely a possibility you could run into something like that. Watch Whimsicott get Body Press in Gen 9, that'd be hilarious. Compare that to Murkrow. We do have similar options such as Taunt as well as Tailwind, and instead of Charm, this has Feather Dance, but it's basically the same move. And offensively, we see Brave Bird, and a couple of the good Dark-type moves like Foul Place, even Sucker Punch for priority attack, which is quite interesting. Now, where the options start to deviate for supportive moves, we have things like Torment and Quash, as well as Haze, Snarl, and Icy Wind, and even Parasong. So the supportive movesets are quite a bit different on these. Even if both are set up with, say, Tailwind, Taunt, and an attack, that fourth move could be any number of different things depending on how the team is built, because you could have Parasong to stall out bulky builds, whereas Whimsicott could have Trick Room as a means of maintaining speed control against a Trick Room team. And Murkrow can eliminate stat changes in the form of Haze, which is great for fighting Dondozo, and also pairs very well with Gholdengo, which Whimsicott does not support Gholdengo as well as Murkrow does, nor does Whimsicott handle Dondozo nearly as well. So some of the popular threats of early meta are better handled by Murkrow actually. Not only is its typing better suited for handling quite common offensive threats in the form of new ground typing and for a while Psychic, and being able to reset Dondozo's stats to effectively make it pointless. In that way, it's actually better than Whimsicott all across the board. It just has a better moveset and a better typing to handle the early meta. However, we just moved into Regulation C, which has the Ruinous legendaries, and I actually think Whimsicott handles those better. Because I actually think Whimsicott's stat distribution combined with its typing make it a little better at handling the Ruinous legendaries. It even has some offense into most of them. And since neither of them can use their prankster moves onto the Ruinous legendaries unless they tear away from Dark, I think Whimsicott does actually handle those scenarios a little bit better. But that may not actually be the issue with Pokemon like Whimsicott and Murkrow, because as we've seen in tournament play, Murkrow hasn't been popular in tournaments at all. It's only been popular on ladder, and its popularity has been dropping recently. And I think a lot of that has to do with the prankster Tailwind not having the same utility that it used to have, because there's a lot of strong priority Pokemon in this game, and even now the Ruinous legendary, forgot its name, but it's the Saber-Tooth Cat. It's faster than Whimsicott and Murkrow, lowers their defense stat just by existing, and with enough offense can probably one-hit both of them with an Ice Shard. So that prankster Tailwind is basically useless against that thing. And even though I really didn't expect it to be as common as it is right now, it and Tinglu are becoming the most common of the Ruinous legendaries. And these prankster supports just really don't answer it that well. Sure, Whimsicott has decent offense into it, but Whimsicott's gonna get blown away by, as I said, an Ice Shard or even an Ice Spinner. So I actually think we're seeing a meta where these prankster supports are just not as viable as they used to be. A lot of speed control right now is being done by Iron Bundle, which has enough offense to properly deal with some of these new legendaries. And it also has a very good speed stat and boost your energy just just makes it incredibly fast. And while it's still not priority speed control, Icy Wind is able to break Focus Sash, and Iron Bundle has enough offense that the Icy Wind actually does a decent chunk of damage. So I think these Ruinous Legendaries have really changed the competitive landscape for doubles, to the point Whimsicott really doesn't seem like it's going to be that good. We're already seeing Murkrow fall off, which it plays very similar to Whimsicott. I think Whimsicott's typing's a little better suited, but I don't know if that's actually enough, because at least currently, its moveset's not as good as Murkrow's right now. I think Moonblast is its best utility, but Flutter Mane does that, and does it quite well. So do you really want your fairy type to be Whimsicott over Flutter Mane? So I actually don't see Whimsicott as being overpowered anymore. That's so weird to say, but here's the thing. In earlier meta, Murkrow was easily in the top 10 most used Pokemon, okay? Its average utilization was around 20-ish%. In Regulation C, that has dropped to less than 4%. It has fallen off considerably. It's even being used less than Azumarill, which was already not a very common Pokemon to just run across. So when Whimsicott arrives, it has to deal with Ruinous Legendaries and Paradox forms, both of which have completely changed the VGC meta to the point where the popular prankster Tailwind right now is Talonflame, and that's probably because it gets access to Will-O-Wisp, which is quite helpful against certain Pokemon in this meta, which neither Whimsicott or Murkrow get Will-O-Wisp, so they lack the utility now to actually stay in the top slots, and they've just kind of lost their purpose, because Iron Bundle has over 20% utilization by comparison. And if you want to ignore speed control altogether, there's Dragonite and Palafin, both of which are quite strong and very common. So I think we're just seeing the end of Prankster Tailwind feeling necessary. And it's even becoming suboptimal just because you're stuck using a Pokemon that doesn't have much offensive utility, and with a lot of archetypes in the meta, the Prankster utility is very much so limited. So I imagine Whimsicott would share a very similar spot next to Murkrow, where you may see like 3 to 5% utilization, which is quite low compared to what these Pokemon used to be in previous metas. So if this has to deal with Ruinous Legendaries and Paradox forms, Whimsicott's just not going to be all that scary, really. It's not even going to be that common based on what we've seen with Murkrow. And the reason for that is both Whimsicott and Murkrow play so similarly. I just don't think they have enough differentiating features that Whimsicott would just be so much better than Murkrow is right now. This meta really is quite a bit different than how things used to be. I imagine a lot of returning Pokemon are not going to be nearly as useful as they used to be, because Gen 9 has so much power crawl in it. But you never know, there could be some buffs coming to the returning Pokemon. Maybe they'll get some new moves that are actually really useful, because I know that in like Gen 8's DLC, they had those new tutor moves. They may do something similar for Gen 9, who knows. This is just based on the information that we do have. But Whimsicott would need a pretty good move upgrade for it to suddenly be oppressive again. I don't even know what moves you could put on this to just suddenly make it better. Though ultimately we'll just have to wait and see. If Whimsicott has some good synergies with other returning Pokemon, it might be common, but I'm not expecting it to be. Anyway, that's gonna be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all next time.